I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. The U.S. just completed their 2 October friendlies. They lost to Germany 3-1 on Saturday and then beat Ghana 4-0 on Tuesday. On today's show, we're going to break down the USMNT's performance in those 2 matches and talk about some of the players that stood out. To help me do that, I've invited Chuck Booth to join the show. Chuck is a soccer writer at CBS Sports. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always better to be on after a win.
That is true. That is true. We might have had a different tone if the U.S. hadn't played so well against Ghana last night. Let's start with just kind of looking at the window as a whole. Big picture, what were some of your biggest takeaways from this window?
I mean, I feel like when you get into takeaways, you almost have to do like Gio Reyna on just like his own little planet and then everything else, because it's clear that just the biggest takeaway has been his performance, his drive, how the team's looked with him on the field for the first half of each of those games versus how the team has looked without him. But I mean, I think in reality, like my biggest takeaway is just that they made the necessary adjustments. Like if you treat these friendlies like they were the group stage at a World Cup, this is exactly what you need to do to qualify for the knockouts. Like you're gonna just lose and potentially look bad against some of the top teams in the world. And despite what they've gone through, Germany is still one of the top teams in the world. But if you can respond by beating the teams you should beat, which Ghana is one of those for the United States now, despite how things may feel after all the World Cup heartbreak prior to finally beating them, they did that, and that's just what you want.
Yeah, let's talk about Gio a little bit more because, coming in, he was the biggest storyline, his reunion with Berhalter for the first time. You mentioned that he was a kind of a difference maker, but what did you see out there that you think made this U.S. team so much better with him on the field?
Well, it's that's where it's wild. Like it's almost like he took Berhalter's comments about like just his lack of a work rate at the World Cup to heart completely, because like while yes, everything he does in the attacking third of the field is just always impressive because he's one of the best dribblers on the team. He has a great eye for a pass into the final third, but his defensive work rate is also one of the things that stood out and made the team tick, because with the United States focusing so much on just being a high pressing team, if your 10 isn't also pressing along with the rest of the team, it's just going to leave too many spaces for the opposition to pass through. And he didn't leave any of those spaces, just making life hell for both Germany and Ghana during the first half.
Yeah, I think, he looked great out there. I think it was great to see him have this performance, be back with Berhalter. I'm hoping that now a lot of folks can kind of move past this whole incident. It's never going to completely go away, but it looked pretty natural and normal out there. I heard him do some interviews. He talked about how normal it felt. He looked like he was having fun out there. You could see Berhalter at times from the sideline coaching him, like talking to him specifically. So my impression was it seemed okay between them. Now we can move on. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. And also, it's like at the end of the day, even if it's not okay between them, it doesn't matter. Like, as long as they're able to coexist with Berhalter being the coach and Gio putting in performances like that during a game, like, who cares about what their relationship is outside of soccer? Like, they're not, I know one of the big things about this team has been just like how together they are and how they're all pulling for each other. But like at the end of the day, even if someone's not potentially the best of friends on the team, as long as they can work together, then they're all accomplishing the same goal.
Right. Right. Totally agree. He seems to be also, I think, developing a good chemistry with Balogun, and he seems to have a real intent in trying to get him the ball. And you can see those two celebrate together when Balogun scores. You saw it at the Nations League, finals as well. So yeah, it was just good to see him out there having fun, and the team just looks like, hey, they're a unit now. They're moving forward. So hopefully that continues. Let's talk about the Germany game a little bit more, because I have to be honest, I was pretty discouraged after that match. I've heard multiple takes from, I've read a lot, listened to a lot, and some people felt it was still a positive experience. Some people felt it was terrible. Some people felt it was just these moments. I personally thought Germany was pretty dominant, even though we had some obviously great moments in the first half. It seemed to me clear that Germany was in control of that game from start to finish, and I was a little discouraged by that. What were your thoughts on the Germany game versus your expectations?
Well, I mean, they technically exceeded my expectations because my actual prediction was for them to lose 4-1. I just think when you're going man for man and Germany finally, hopefully being at a point where they're just doing the simple things right, because it felt like previously before Nagelsmann, like Germany was just trying to do too much and not just letting their players play to their strengths, because they still have just one of the most dangerous teams in the world. And the United States, especially without Tyler Adams, defensively leaves a lot to be desired. And just while a lot of their play attacking wise was good, if you leave out the fact that they crossed the ball 20 times and only completed 3 of those crosses, defensively, it just wasn't great outside of Tim Ream. Some of that comes down to the fact that I just really never want to see Serginho Dest on the left again. He just doesn't seem comfortable over there, and it essentially just like takes away even from his attacking play, which is really what you want him out for. Because even one of the things after the game that Berhalter talked about is that essentially he doesn't want Dest to defend more, because the rest of the team should be able to cover for him when he goes forward, because if he's not going forward, he's not particularly even a good enough defender to just be a defensive fullback. But without Tyler Adams, it's like, who is actually covering for him in midfield?
Yeah, I want to talk about that, no Tyler Adams plan B. I want to dig into that a little bit deeper. But first, I want to continue on this theme of, okay, is the U.S. capable of beating these elite teams in the world? In the last year, we've played 3 of them. England and the Netherlands at the World Cup, and now Germany in this friendly. We have 1 tie, 2 losses, 2 3-1 losses. And I think that was what was most discouraging to me, is I thought maybe the U.S. was a little bit closer to Germany than what it appeared. But I walked away from that match thinking, wow, no, there's still quite a bit of ways to go. I mean,
I
do you think
still
I'm overreacting?
I think slightly, just because if Tyler Adams and Anthony Robinson are there, I think it's a very different result. I'm not sure if they win, but it's a much more competitive game from start to finish. It's just part of the issue with Adams is I'm beginning to become concerned about when will he be there, because even making his like 1 appearance in the EFL Cup, then going back to training and re-injuring his hamstring, that he's getting into the territory where these are starting to become chronic issues. And so you really do have to prepare for what happens if he can't go. The back line should be fine, because we've seen what Robinson can do defensively, both for Fulham and for the national team. And it's more than adequate enough to at least slow down some of the top wingers in the world, if not necessarily stop them. And center back, once we just figure out what the actual pairing is probably one of our biggest strengths of around the entire team. depth wise with what can be put out there and different options, mixing and matching like Cameron Carter Vickers, Chris Richards, Miles Robinson, Mark McKenzie, and even going further down the pool because you have young players like Neil who are also gonna be there sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I mean, I left that match kind of pretty discouraged over time. I thought, okay, maybe it is one match and I shouldn't put so much just on one. And then they came out and they played so well against Ghana. But I'm just this young USMNT team that we've been following now for what, almost 4 years. If you look at their failure to qualify for the 2018 World Cup, 5 years, I still think I want to see him get that big win against an elite team before the next World Cup. I feel like that's so important. They're going to have a chance to do it at the Copa America, but I'm just still craving that really big win.
And that's why essentially Copa America is going to be what defines Berhalter's tenure in charge of the team. Because while, yes, he was given the job for another World Cup cycle, like if they don't do well at Copa America, I don't think there's a chance that he stays in the job because there's just too much risk with only 2 years from that until the World Cup, where expectations are going to be higher than they've ever been for this team, that you will need to look at something else. But he has, I mean, earned the right to try and topple the big teams in the world with this team in that tournament. And it's also important to remember like that just a lot of players, even those who aren't currently in their prime, like Reina and Musa, by that tournament will be much closer to being at that point. Like just playing in these types of games, like losing to Germany like that. Like the United States hasn't had games where they've just like clearly been second best and were just blown out of the water since 2019, because there were the back-to-back I think it was 3-0 losses to Mexico and Venezuela, and those were also the last times that the team has lost back-to-back matches under Berhalter just in general. So some of that's down to the competition that they've been playing in these games, but also it's pretty clear that for most teams in the world that they can beat them, but they just need that extra spark for getting past like Germany, Argentina, Brazil. And it seems like between Gio Reyna and Balogun, who they haven't had for most of those games, that those two can bring that spark.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that this team is growing and getting better. You know, like I just said, they still haven't beat that elite team. But when you look at the way they're playing against, I don't know, teams that are solid, but maybe more the mid-tier teams in the world, the teams that you would expect us to beat, they are starting to beat those teams, pretty consistently. They've consistently been beating Mexico and all the teams in CONCACAF, the way they beat Ghana, last night. And they didn't always do that, And so I am seeing that they're starting to get a little bit more separation from some of the other teams around the world and maybe inching closer to the elite teams. But yeah, that Copa America, I see that as the most critical part of World Cup 2026, preparation, and that's going to be so exciting to see.
No, I mean 100%. Like that tournament is so important. I mean, I remember being at the Copa America Centenario when they played in Philly, and just just being able to see them against that level of opposition that you usually don't see the United States play is just so important. And the players get up for those games and they certainly don't want to lose them, because like you didn't see anyone happy after losing to Germany. And it's like, while this is still a friendly, like you don't want them to feel like the friendly doesn't matter. And the only way to do that is by being able to schedule these top teams, which I know unfortunately is harder to do with just all these cash grab tournaments like CONCACAF and UEFA Nations League, but they're at least still doing what they can to try to schedule. Like even playing like Japan and Morocco, it's like they are getting better friendlies. It's just not easy.
Yeah, my hope is that they have this Copa America in 2024, which will be a good test, and then in 2025, I think they're going to hopefully have an easier time getting some friendlies because there's going to be a lot of teams that want to come to the U.S. and kind of get a feel for what it's like playing here, traveling around here, visiting some of these stadiums and prep for the World Cup. So that's my hope. Let's talk about the midfield. You mentioned no Tyler Adams and how important he is to this team, but yeah, it doesn't look like he's coming back anytime soon. I think this is the second long injury prone spell I remember him having where he wasn't with the team, for a while. And so we are going to have to get more comfortable with some type of a plan B, not just for the next, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it is, but also in case, he is missing for some of these key games down the road. Against Germany, they went with, double pivot, McKennie and Musa, Reina playing that more central number 10. Against Ghana, same thing, except it was Musa and Cardoso. What'd you make of how they lined up without him versus Germany and Ghana? And did you have any preference for those two scenarios?
So for the Germany game in particular, I was kind of disappointed to see that that was the way that they came out because I really thought that bringing Leonard Maloney into camp to get a look at what he can do, that the easiest time to actually put him into a lineup would have been against Bundesliga players that he plays again week in, week out as a defensive midfielder, and just to see, like, can he turn distance covered into the Bundesliga into being able to help protect the back line in that game. And him not getting on the field at all against Germany was probably one of my biggest disappointments about the entire game, as opposed to necessarily the overall result. Just because these friendlies are big times where you look at moments for when a player can succeed. And like, while I'm not necessarily behind the scenes seeing like what he's able to do in training, because you do have to be ready for those moments, it just felt like from the outside looking in, a time that would have been good for him. That being said, against most teams in the world, I have no issues with Musa McKennie double pivot, just because they've shown that they can do enough on defense that they can stop the majority of midfields. It's just, again, when you're getting to that higher tier and teams that just have excellent number 10s, I mean, most teams aren't doing much to stop Jamal Musiala in general, but you would have liked to have a better defensive presence out there for at least attempting to stop him, because neither one of them is like at that level defensively where they're bringing that.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more of Maloney too. I mean, he came on late in that Ghana game, but honestly, I didn't get to see enough of him to really form any type of judgment for how he did. So I didn't really learn anything about Maloney, this window, and I would have liked to seen him.
Yeah, I don't even feel like you can judge a single defensive-minded player on that Ghana game, like, at all. Like,
yeah. That's true. Well, let's talk about some player performances. When you look at the this overall window, who are some of the players you thought had the best performance?
I kind of have to put the entire attacking band together, because I mean, you have Pulisic's just wonder goal against Germany. While I don't think Weah was great against Germany, he was great against Ghana. And part of it is like, also, as kind of the entire team figures out their positioning and spacing with Balogun, he's also working on that too. Because like in the Germany game, he only completed like 2 passes to Balogun. And like, that's not something that you want to see from one of your wingers that's the best at actually getting into space and pushing the defense. And it was just a lot better against Ghana. Like again, it is still when judging that game, I am struggling to put the how bad was Ghana versus how good was the United States in that game. But even if you go somewhere in the middle, just like every member of the attacking four, like either scoring or assisting a goal, like the United States is going to win most of those games. And those are the players that this team is just going to live and die by. Like they're not going to win many 1-0 games on a set play because like they're also just not still particularly good at set plays. Although that indirect free kick was something else for Reyna's second goal. Outside of them, I mean, definitely, I thought overall that it was a good window for Weston McKennie, even taking the second half of Germany into account in his performance. Like I think he was just so good and so driven in that first half, and like he's someone who has a very weird role with the national team because he's done everything from like playing almost basically as a 10, playing as a box-to-box midfielder, playing as the actual defensive midfielder too, where I think his role is kind of just down to what his instructions are and if they're clear enough to understand. And it just kind of feels like in that second half of Germany, and why I'm willing to write most of that off is that it's just that the instructions and familiarity for a lot of members of the team just like weren't there for that. But if you take the other 90 minutes that he played, it was clear that he's still one of the better members of this midfield.
Yeah, it's going to be real curious to see how Greg utilizes him, and I mean all of the midfield once Tyler Adams comes back. But I feel like McKennie's at his best when he's playing that box to box role. But if you're going to be playing Gio Reyna, as that number 10 and having the double pivot, I feel like you're not utilizing McKennie's strengths, all of his strengths, if you put him there. And he might not also be the best to put there because he has a hard time sometimes being disciplined, like in a defensive role. But I'm real curious to see how Berhalter's what he's gonna do with McKennie when everybody's back. If he continues to go forward with Gio Reyna playing in the number 10 role.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting discussion because you can make an argument to start or sit any of the midfielders depending on the situation. And I mean, overall, that's definitely a good thing because it will drive them to do better. But I mean, I feel like if he's not, if Yunus Musa isn't playing as a defensive midfielder in some of these midfields, especially with Adams back, because it feels like against teams where you really need to defend that Adams should be the 6, and against teams where you can push possession that it should be Musa right now. But if he's not playing it as the actual like 6, I am curious if he's actually the odd man out of the midfield, which is weird because he is still one of the most talented members of the midfield, but he still struggles when it comes to decision making once he's completed that dribble and what he does with the ball next, which leads to just at times easy turnovers for the United States against teams that know, like, okay, I mean, you can kind of just lay off of him, let him get to where he wants to go because it's not going to go anywhere after that. And the second that he unlocks like that portion of his game, he's going to be one of the best midfielders in the world. But he's also still young enough where, like Reyna, he's still just trying to figure out that ebb and flow.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how this midfield plays out. What about a player that you think had a poor performance in this window, or a few of the players you think had poor performances?
So I would say probably The most glaring performances that I've seen, I mean, number one is Joe Scally by far. He had a massive opportunity against Germany and just wasn't able to take it. It just felt like constantly we're at that point of like, okay, we've seen what he does in the Bundesliga. When will he do it with the national team? And we're still just consistently asking that question. Like there was so much space left behind him, just making it almost impossible for Chris Richards, who also didn't have a great window, but I wouldn't say that he necessarily had a terrible one just because you do have to think about that spacing and how he was put into certain positions. But it's like outside of that, it's hard to really glaringly nitpick because even for most players that had poor performances against Germany, they immediately turn those around against Ghana. Even when it came to just everyone against Germany did a poor job at actually like finding Balogun. Against Ghana, they didn't, and he was able to like take 5 shots, I think, putting 3 on target and scoring, and realistically could have had a hat trick in the game. So it's just about like that transition play, and some of that seemed to be just with Ghana having Christopher London at left back, pushing Des back to right back, kind of just overloaded them way too much, and they couldn't defend the U.S. man for man.
Okay, so that's it. That was the October window. Up next, we have the November window. It's going to be the Nations League quarterfinals. I'm not sure if CONCACAF has officially announced this, but from what I'm reading, it looks like the U.S. is going to play Trinidad and Tobago. First leg will be November 16th here in Austin, Texas. Where I am, I'm hoping to be at that game. And then the second leg will be November 20th at Trinidad or whoever else that may be. This matchup, to me, this quarterfinals, while it might not be the biggest test for the U.S., it might not be the sexiest game out there, I could argue it's the most important because it gives us direct burst to the Copa America in 2024 if we win it. Any thoughts on this upcoming quarterfinal?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agreed. Like it is such an important match because there is a tangible result from it, and I like that also as part of this they're going to have to actually go into Trinidad and clinch a spot in a knockout tournament. That is still important when we're getting missing the World Cup out of our minds. Like I don't think that they'll have any trouble with Trinidad, but it is still just one of those things where you want to see like how do they deal with the nerves? Like do they take care of everything at home? Do they actually leave it for going into Trinidad? But I think overall it's gonna be fun to watch.
Well, Chuck, thanks so much for coming on the show. Before I let you go, could you please let people know where they should go if they want to see more of your work? And then please feel free to share any final thoughts that you have.
Realistically, especially with how Twitter, X, whatever is nerfing anything with links, while I am on there at Chuck Blue Sport, and that's sport, not sports, because there weren't enough characters for an actual S to be at the end of my handle. You can also just find me at CBS Sports Soccer, and that's where, I mean, all of my written work is these days. Still weird not needing to list like 5 sites for that anymore, but yeah, no, everything's there, and yeah, I mean, hopefully just things still continue being fun with the national team because it's been quite a ride.
Thank you, Chuck. And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a fellow USMNT fan. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on Twitter/X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.